Aldrich was not supposed to be in the Ashfan woods. The path he usually took ran along the open road, wide and clear, with good visibility on both sides. But the bridge 3 miles back had washed out in the last rain, and the ferryman had not returned, so Aldrich had done what he always did when there was no easy way forward. He found another way. The woods were quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that made a person walk a little faster without knowing why. The trees here were old and dark, their roots thick and twisted above the ground like the fingers of something buried beneath. Moss covered everything. The light that came through the leaves was thin and gray, even though the sky above was clear. Aldrich kept his eyes ahead and his steps steady. He was a simple man. Not young, not old. Somewhere in the middle, with rough hands and a worn travel pack and a cloak that had seen better years. He had worked as a field healer once, long ago, moving between small villages and farming settlements, helping where he could. He no longer did that work. Now he mostly moved from one place to the next, taking small jobs, staying nowhere too long. He was thinking about nothing in particular when he heard it. A sound. Small. Wet. Like something struggling to pull air into a chest that did not want to open. He stopped. He looked around slowly. The sound came again, from somewhere to his left, down a short slope where the ground dipped toward a dry riverbed. He stood still for a moment. His mind was already telling him not to go down there. This was borderland. Everyone knew it. The woods between human settlements and dragon territory were not a place where a person went looking for trouble. But the sound came again. And it was small. Whatever was making it was very small. He went down the slope. At the edge of the dry riverbed, half hidden under the root of a fallen tree, lay a hatchling. A dragon hatchling. It was tiny, smaller than he had expected, about the size of a large dog but thin and fragile looking, its scales a dull greenish-gray where they should have probably been brighter. Its wings were folded against its body in a wrong way, loose and limp. Its eyes were closed. Its whole small body was shaking with short, shallow breaths. Aldrich crouched down slowly and held the back of his hand near its nose. The heat that came off it was wrong. Not the normal warmth of a living creature. This was the burning dry heat of a high fever, the kind that cooked a body from the inside if it went on long enough. He sat back on his heels and looked at it for a long moment. He thought about the dragon settlement somewhere deeper in the woods. He thought about what dragons did to humans who wandered into their land. He thought about how this was not his problem, not his territory, not his kind. He thought about all of that very clearly. Then he took off his cloak. He wrapped the hatchling carefully, slowly, making sure not to press on the wings. It made a weak sound when he lifted it, a small broken noise that went straight through him. He adjusted his grip and held it against his chest, where the warmth of his body might help, and stood up. It was heavier than it looked. Not terribly heavy, but solid. He shifted his pack to one shoulder and held the hatchling with both arms and started walking again, deeper into the woods, because going back the way he came made no sense now. He needed to find dragons. He needed to find someone who could help this animal, because he was a field healer and a decent one, but he was not equipped for this. He did not know where he was going exactly. He just walked. Behind him, from somewhere up among the old dark trees, there was a sound. Not loud. Just the soft press of something large moving carefully across the ground, the way something moves when it does not want to be heard but is too big to be completely silent. Aldrich did not turn around. He told himself it was the wind through the roots. He told himself the woods made strange sounds. He told himself a lot of things. But the sound stayed behind him, steady and quiet, step for step, as he carried the small burning creature through the gray light of the Ashfan woods. He did not look back. He just kept walking. Aldrich walked until his arms ached. He did not stop. Stopping felt wrong. The hatchling was still breathing, still shaking with that dry terrible heat, and as long as it was breathing he kept moving. He adjusted his grip every few minutes, shifting the small weight from one side to the other, keeping it pressed close to his chest where it was warmest. He talked to it. He was not sure why. It probably could not understand him. It was a hatchling, very young, and even if dragons understood human speech when they were grown, this one was too sick and too small to follow anything he said. But the silence of the woods felt heavy, and something in him thought that a sick creature, any sick creature, did better when it heard a calm voice nearby. So he talked. He told it about the villages he had worked in. He told it about a farmer who had once paid him in carrots because that was all he had, and how Aldrich had eaten nothing but carrots for 4 days and had never quite forgiven the man. He told it about a river he had crossed once that was so cold it had stopped his breath for a full second. Small stories. Quiet ones. Nothing important. Every so often he stopped just long enough to uncork his water flask and wet a corner of his cloak and press it gently to the hatchling's mouth. It did not drink exactly, but its tongue moved faintly once or twice, which he took as a good sign. He kept the wet cloth pressed to its scales near the neck too, where the fever seemed worst, hoping the cool water would pull some of the heat out. It was not much. He knew it was not much. But it was what he had. He had been walking for what felt like 2 hours when he heard the footsteps behind him slow and then stop being behind him. He glanced to his left without turning his head fully and saw the old dragoness moving up alongside him, settling into his pace as naturally as if they had been walking together from the start. She was old. That much was clear. Her scales were a faded brown, almost the color of dry bark, and her movements had the careful steadiness of something that had lived a very long time and no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. She was not large for a dragon. Smaller than he would have expected. But there was a weight to her presence that had nothing to do with size. She looked at the hatchling in his arms and then looked ahead at the path. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and even, with the rough texture that older dragons sometimes had when they used the human tongue. She asked him how long the hatchling had been like this. Aldrich told her he did not know. He had found it maybe 2 hours ago, perhaps a little more, and it had already been in a bad state when he came across it. She nodded slowly and asked him where he was taking it. He told her the truth. He did not know exactly. He was looking for a dragon settlement, somewhere with healers, somewhere he could hand it to someone who knew what to do. He was following the tree line east because that was the only direction that made sense to him. She was quiet for a while after that. Then she asked him why he had picked it up at all. Aldrich thought about the question as he walked. It was not a complicated question, but it deserved an honest answer, not a quick one. He said he was a field healer once. Not a great one. Just a practical one. And a practical healer did not walk past something that was still breathing and could still be helped. The old dragoness looked at the hatchling again. She asked him if he thought it would survive. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he did not know. Its fever was high and it had been out in the cold for too long and he did not have the right medicines for a creature like this. He could not make her any promises about what would happen. She asked him then if he would put it down if it got worse. If the weight became too much. If the risk became too great. Aldrich did not hesitate. He said no. The old dragoness said nothing after that. She simply walked beside him through the grey quiet woods, her eyes forward, her steps slow and steady. But she did not leave. The settlement appeared between the trees without warning. One moment there was nothing but dark trunks and low branches, and the next there were structures, wide and heavy, built from stone and dark timber in a way that seemed to grow out of the earth rather than sit on top of it. The buildings were large, sized for creatures much bigger than a man, with wide doorways and thick walls and rooftops that curved like the backs of sleeping animals. Smoke rose from somewhere deeper inside. The smell of something warm and herbal drifted through the cold air. Aldrich stopped at the tree line. He counted 6 dragons visible from where he stood. 2 near the far wall. 1 on a raised platform that might have been a watchtower. 3 more moving between the buildings. All of them stopped when they saw him. The silence that followed was the loudest thing he had ever heard. He stepped forward anyway. He kept his steps slow and his posture open, the way he used to approach nervous animals when he was younger, no sudden movements, no sharp angles, everything calm and readable. He held the hatchling out slightly in front of him so they could see it clearly. So they could see what he was carrying and understand why he was there. He got about 20 steps inside the tree line before the dragons moved. They came fast. Not running, but purposeful, closing the distance between him and them in a way that left no question about who was in control of the situation. They spread in a loose arc in front of him and stopped. Their eyes were fixed on him with the kind of attention that made the back of his neck go cold. He stopped walking. A large dragon pushed through from the back of the group. Older than the others, broader, with dark reddish scales and eyes that had seen enough of the world to be finished with surprises. This one moved like someone who was used to being listened to. He stopped a few feet from Aldrich and looked down at him the way a man might look at something he had found under a rock. This was Elder Croft. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. He looked at the hatchling in Aldrich's arms for exactly 1 second. Then he looked at Aldrich and told him in flat clear words to put the hatchling on the ground, step back 3 paces, and keep his hands where they could be seen. Aldrich did not move. He said he understood how this looked. He said he knew he was standing in Dragon Land and that a human holding one of their young was not something that looked good from any direction. He was not arguing with that. But the hatchling had a high fever and had been sick for hours and it needed a healer, and he was not going to put it on the cold ground until someone was ready to take it properly. Croft's eyes narrowed. He said it again. Put it down. Aldrich said no. Not loudly. Not with any edge to it. Just a plain and simple no, the kind that had no argument inside it, just a fact. He was not going to put the hatchling down. If Croft wanted to remove him by force, that was his choice to make, but Aldrich was not going to be the one to put a sick infant on the cold dirt. The dragons around him shifted. The air felt tight. Someone behind Croft made a low sound deep in their chest. Then the old dragoness walked out of the trees. She had been a few steps behind Aldrich the whole way and he had almost forgotten she was there. She moved past him without a word and stopped between him and Croft and stood there, saying nothing for a moment, just looking at the elder with an expression that was very quiet and very still. Croft looked at her. Something crossed his face that was hard to read. Not quite recognition. More like uncertainty, the kind that came when a person suddenly felt they had made a miscalculation but did not yet know how large it was. The old dragoness told him calmly and simply to stand aside and let the healers through. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Croft held her gaze for a long moment. Then he stepped back. He did not look happy about it. He did not look like a dragon who was finished with this situation. But he stepped back, and the arc of dragons shifted with him, and from somewhere inside the settlement 3 smaller dragons came forward with careful eyes and steady movements. Healers. Aldrich exhaled slowly and held the hatchling out toward them with both arms. His hands, he noticed, were shaking slightly. He had not noticed that before. They took the hatchling inside and closed the door. Aldrich stood in front of that door for a moment after it shut, his arms still slightly raised from the act of handing the small creature over. Then he let them fall to his sides and stepped back and found a low flat stone near the outer wall and sat down on it. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands and sat like that for a while. His back hurt. His arms hurt more. The cloak he had wrapped the hatchling in was gone, taken with it inside, and the night air was cold enough that he felt it through his shirt almost immediately. He did not move to get his pack. He just sat there and let the cold settle around him and stared at the ground between his boots. The settlement had gone quiet around him. The dragons who had been outside earlier had moved away. Some had gone inside other buildings. Some had simply disappeared into the dark. Only a few remained visible, standing near the far wall, watching him with the careful attention of people who had not yet decided what they thought about something. Elder Croft was not visible. That was either good or it meant nothing at all. Aldrich decided not to think about Croft. He heard the old dragoness before he saw her. The soft press of her steps on the ground, slow and unhurried, and then she was beside him, lowering herself down near the wall with the careful movement of old joints that needed a moment to settle. She did not say anything. She simply sat, her eyes forward, her breathing slow and even. The night came in fully around them. The temperature dropped. Aldrich pulled his knees closer to his chest and said nothing about the cold. There was nothing useful to say about it. It was cold and he was outside, and those were simply the facts of the situation. After a long while the old dragoness spoke. She asked him what he had been before he was a wanderer. He told her about the field healer work. Small villages, farming communities, people who could not afford proper physicians and needed someone who knew which plants helped a fever and how to close a wound cleanly and when to tell a person that rest was the only medicine left. He had done that work for 11 years, he said. Moving from place to place. Never staying. She asked him why he stopped. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that after enough time, carrying other people's hardest days began to settle into a person in ways that were difficult to explain. He had not stopped caring. He had just needed to put the bag down for a while and walk without it. The old dragoness listened without interrupting. When he finished, she did not offer an opinion on what he had said. She just let it sit between them in the dark, which he appreciated more than he could have explained. He asked her, after a while, if she thought the healers inside were good at their work. She said yes. Without hesitation. He nodded and looked back at the door. Time passed strangely in the dark. He was not sure if he slept at any point. He thought perhaps he did, briefly, with his back against the cold wall and his chin dropped toward his chest. If he did, it was not restful. He snapped back to awareness more than once at small sounds, his eyes going immediately to the closed door across the way. The old dragoness was always there when he looked. Sitting beside him. Still and quiet. Not asleep. Just present. At some point the black of the sky began to soften. Not light yet, not truly, but the particular darkness that meant light was thinking about arriving. The coldest part of the night. Aldrich's fingers were stiff and he pressed them together inside his palms and waited. The door opened. One of the healers stepped out. A younger dragon, with careful eyes and a tired look that Aldrich recognized from his own years of long nights. The healer looked at him across the distance between them and then crossed it slowly and stopped in front of him. The hatchling's fever had broken in the night, the healer said. It was weak and would need time. But it would live. Aldrich looked at the healer for a moment without speaking. Then he nodded once, slowly, and looked down at the ground. He did not say anything. There was a tightness in his throat that made words difficult and he did not trust his voice to come out steady. Beside him the old dragoness said nothing either. She simply looked at him, quiet and still, in the gray light before dawn. The sun came up slowly. It pushed thin gold light through the gaps in the trees and spread across the stone ground of the settlement in long quiet strips. The cold of the night began to lift, not quickly, but enough that Aldrich felt it leave his shoulders by degrees. He was still sitting near the wall where he had spent the night. His back was stiff and his eyes were heavy, but he had not moved from that spot. He did not want to leave before he saw it one more time. The healer had told him the hatchling was resting inside and would need to be kept warm and still for at least another day. Aldrich understood that. He had no intention of asking to hold it or disturb its rest. He just wanted to see it. Just once. Just enough to know with his own eyes that it was real and breathing and on the other side of the worst of it. He was still sitting there thinking about this when he heard it. A small sound from inside the enclosure near the far end of the building. A soft scraping, like something moving across a stone floor on unsteady legs. Then a shape appeared at the low barred window set into the wall near the ground. A small head. Dull greenish-gray scales. 2 eyes, half open and glassy with tiredness but open, actually open, looking out at the morning. Looking at him. Aldrich stood up slowly. He crossed the ground between them and crouched down in front of the low window. The hatchling pressed its nose through the bars and made a sound that was barely a sound at all, something between a breath and a call. Its small legs were trembling with the effort of holding itself up, but it did not move back. Aldrich reached through the bars carefully and placed 2 fingers against the side of its head, just behind the jaw where the scales were softest. It leaned into his hand. Not much. Just slightly. The way a very tired creature leans towards something warm. He stayed like that without speaking. He heard movement behind him. Several sets of footsteps. He did not turn around immediately. He kept his hand where it was until the hatchling's eyes slowly closed again and it lowered itself back down to the floor inside. Then he stood and turned. Most of the settlement had gathered. He had not heard them come. They had moved into the open space behind him quietly and stood in a wide loose group, watching. Elder Croft was among them, standing to one side with an expression that was difficult to name. Not hostile anymore. Something quieter than that. Something that looked almost like a man who had been certain about something for a long time and had just been given reason to reconsider. The old dragoness stood at the front. She was looking at Aldrich steadily. Her expression had changed from the long careful neutrality of the night. There was something open in it now. Something that had been kept behind a door and was no longer being kept there. She stepped forward into the middle of the open ground. And then the air changed. It was not loud. It was not violent. It was simply a shift, the way the air shifts before a storm, a pressure and a stillness arriving at the same moment. The old dragoness grew. Not slowly. All at once. The small faded brown form expanded and rose and the color deepened from dry bark to something richer, darker, threaded through with deep gold that caught the morning light like metal. Her wings spread without effort and filled the space above her. Her eyes, which had been quiet and watchful all through the long night, were now very clear and very old and very certain. She was not an old wandering dragoness. She had never been. Queen Marin stood before the settlement in her true form, and every dragon behind Aldrich dropped low to the ground without a sound. Aldrich did not drop. He simply stood very still and stared and said absolutely nothing because there were no words available to him at that particular moment. The queen looked at him for a long time. Then she spoke, and her voice in her true form was deeper than before, the way a river is deeper than a stream, the same water, just more of it. She told her people what she had seen in the woods. What she had watched through the long night. A human who had found a sick hatchling in territory that was not his own and had carried it for hours and refused to put it down and refused to leave and asked for nothing in return. Then she turned fully to Aldrich and spoke a word in the dragon tongue. She told him what it meant. One who does not put down. She said it was a name given only once in living memory, and never before to a human, and that it was his now if he would take it. Aldrich looked at her. Then he looked at the low window where the hatchling was sleeping inside, warm and alive in the morning light. He said he would take it. The queen dipped her great head toward him. Behind him every dragon in the settlement did the same. Aldrich stood in the middle of it all, a tired man with stiff shoulders and no cloak, and felt something settle in his chest that had not been settled in a very long time.